Thank you, Judith, for an amazing presentation regarding structures and behavior. We all know that they drive action, and what we do to create those structures and behaviors is essential for good school improvement. So you talked a lot about sort of three areas, Judith, that you struggled with and figured out how to address. So time and engagement and stamina. So I'm wondering, Judith, what does it look like to build trust and accountability among your staff teams? So really looking at that engagement part. Now that we have the structure to create the engagement, but how do you actually create the engagement to build that trust and accountability?
Yes, and so that is one reason why we changed the PLC grouping choice. Like I'll be in this piece. So taking the and I'll explain why we changed the format of that. So taking the time at the beginning, we want to jump in and just like, what's our action? What are we going to be doing? So having that time for just those conversations, I spend a lot of time in my staff meetings. We meet like in terms of building trust and relationships. Relationships are at the core of everything. So we meet in a circle. We sit in a circle in our staff meetings, and we sit. This year is probably our first year where we don't have as huge a staff change for various reasons. So we spend the time on learning about each other, like low key questions like, what's your favorite ice cream? Or I just, one thing about me, and or something like that. And over time, the trust gets built. And I think providing that time and slowing down to provide that time for people to see each other as people, it's so tempting to be, but we need to get on this, we need to get on this, we need to get on this. But if you don't have a team that is together, then you're not going to ever get on it. It's the same as your classroom, right? If you just jump right in, it's as a classroom teacher. So we model that as adult learners. So that was one issue we had in the PLC groupings, because last year we created the groups by whatever the teachers were teaching as their grade groupings. It worked for, we had kindergarten, worked great. Grades 1 and 2, that group focused on structured literacy, worked great. Grade 3, 4, didn't really coalesce. Our grade 5 to 8 had, like, they worked together well as a team, but did we do a lot of professional learning? No, not really. We did, like, there's always professional learning. And so that 3, 4 took a lot of time, and I don't think we ever got momentum, because just we were meeting every 5 weeks, because we cycled through every 5 weeks you met with your group. And so that's why we went to choose what you want to focus on and put that into the group. So everyone has come in already with a sense of engagement on a topic, as opposed to being an imposed group. That with the overview that it can't be any topic, whatever, it's based on what our foci are for this year or for the past couple of years. And also one other thing we're hoping to do is, we're not meeting every 5 weeks as a group. It's based on timing, right? So maybe there might be one group that just feels like they need to meet every week to get things up and running, but another topic could be something that is only go try something, come back in a few weeks. So we're working on that. Hopefully that helps answer that.
Thanks, Judith. Mike, did you have a question?
I do have a question, actually, and I was really intrigued with the three boxes on your slide. So time, engagement, and stamina. And it strikes me that I don't know a classroom teacher that doesn't struggle with those three areas, and I mean that in the most supportive way. So I'm wondering if this structure also applies to your teachers, if you ask them to reflect on those three boxes. In other words, how they're managing their time, how they build engagement in their classroom, and how they maintain their stamina, because we all know that by May and June, we've run out of a lot of energy, not just the leadership, but also the classroom teachers. So do you have a sense, do you structure the sort of way that teachers think about school improvement as well, or just maybe you have some thoughts on that?
My thought is, this is why I love meeting as a group with fellow leaders, because that is amazing. I love that idea of like, these No, so I haven't done anything formally, but this is a great idea in terms of, because as you know, as a leader, sometimes you have people coming into your office, oh, or there's one more thing. I don't have time to do this. Am I going to be released for this? So it's just having that conversation. So the answer is no, not yet. But I love that idea. Again, and Mike, you highlighted, here's one more structure, right? You have a framework that we can then plug things into for that. That's awesome.
And if I can just add one other thing, Judith, you led with something that talked about, and this is maybe to Jane's question as well about building trust. You led with, these are the things I struggle with as a leader. And that speaks to your vulnerability, or the fact that you're not the be all and end all of people. You are amazing, but every single one of us as leaders struggles with a few things, some of which we're comfortable sharing, some of which we're not as comfortable sharing. But I think that helping people to understand that it's okay to be vulnerable and to be honest, frankly, about where you struggle. Some teachers struggle with planning, some teachers struggle with assessment, a whole bunch of different things. But that I guess answered the question for me, which is, you led by saying, here are the 3 areas that I struggle with. Maybe some of your staff struggle in those 3 areas as well. And I mean, as a teacher, I struggled with all 3 of those. So it's that's just a quick addendum there.
Thanks, Mike. And I'm pretty transparent about this with my staff. This is a new slide deck for me, but I do, when we have these conversations, I'm pretty clear that we're all ongoing on this learning journey. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Caitlin?
So, Judith, my question comes from obviously colleague to colleague. You talked a lot about that broad general structure in terms of setting up the timetable and the staff. My question is, in terms of productivity and being effective in those meetings, do you have a microstructure that your teachers, when they're engaging in this discussion in the PLC, have to follow? I know sometimes I've set up norms or I've set up expectations, takeaways. Can you talk a little bit about what that actual structure that you've laid out, whether you have a POR sitting there, whether you're a part of the meeting? Can you chat a little bit about your structure on a micro level for the teachers?
So that didn't make it to one of the things that didn't necessarily work last year, because last year was the first year we had the day 3 PLC. So last year it was Rachel, my VP, and I, that it was like, oh my goodness, it's day 3 tomorrow. We knew which group was coming in. And for the grade 1s, we had a lead teacher. So it varied, right? So we had a lead teacher in grade 1 who really has embraced the structured science of reading and structured literacy. So she knew this is the week, and they had a goal. So they set up at the end of the 30 minutes, we're going to try this. Next time we're together, we're going to share the ideas, and we're going to have a guest speaker, or we're going to move on. So that lead teacher created that. So that was the structure for that. And the same for the kindergarten. So for this year, we are going to ask for our PORs or lead staff to be the coordinator for that group. It could be one of the administrators, but what our lesson has been is we both try to sit in on those meetings, but sometimes in order for that to happen, one of us needs to be stepping out, dealing with other things so that meeting can continue. So my VP, and luckily I have a VP, so my VP and I can look at each other going, okay, these 2 groups are kind of your portfolio. So if one of us needs to get pulled, it will be me, or vice versa. But, and so we're looking for lead teachers to create that timeline structure so that at the end of each session, everybody knows what's next. And one other thing we have in place that will continue is we created a Google Doc that had all of the meetings, like on one doc, that who attended the meeting, and then just highlights of what happened and what needed to happen next. So the whole school community can see what all the groups are doing, not in specifics, but and what the next steps are. And it's all in one doc that they can go take a look at, especially if you forget, oh, what did I say I was going to do? And then they can go back and take a look at that. So we're learning on that, trying to figure that piece out. And so what we're trying to avoid for this time is Rachel and I going, oh my gosh, tomorrow's day 3. What are we going to be doing on day 3 PLC? we're asking others to just have that set up.
Thanks, Caitlin and Judith. So Judith, I have a question about, you've got your plan, you've got your teams, you've co-constructed your goals, you're doing the work that you have decided is necessary for the students that you serve. And, we get to the monitoring and implementation, and that tends to be the most difficult part of school improvement. And oftentimes when people think, but we did all this learning, we did all this amazing work, and our scores didn't change, we didn't see changes at our students' desks. And that's because the monitoring and the implementation has, perhaps not as been as robust as it could be. And it's the hardest part of the plan. So how do you monitor and implement, and how do you know you're doing well and that you need to pivot a plan?
Jane, just for those, Jane and I work together, right? I was like, oh, Jane's going to ask that question. It's like Susie started, I was like, yes. So that's part of the monitoring implementing is that Google Doc sheet that we have that has the goal for next time, or there's a question, because sometimes what came forward last year was we struggled with this, or next time we're bringing in evidence of implementation, your inquiry question that is, say you're in the inquiry group, your inquiry question that you've told to your students, how did that go? So we're gonna spend everyone's gonna share about 5 minutes how that went. We just got some great grade 1 reading resources that we just got landed in our mailboxes, and our first day 3 PLC is next Thursday. So our grade 1 team is going to meet, and we have a plan for how to use an assessment tool. So they're going to go and they're going to learn how to use it, and they're going to go use it and come back and tell us where their scores are. So there's the monitoring, and then go and do that. So that is the hardest part, but also because we can say, oh, well, I implemented it and it went well, but we bring in the documentation. Sometimes last year, after one grouping, they're like, how do we mark inquiry? How do I assess and evaluate an inquiry? I have to write a report card. So the next time they met, people who felt more comfortable with it brought samples of the inquiry and shared it. And then we did some moderated marking. And then we could track the students to see how the learning and the engagement piece. I'm with you. It's an ongoing process, but you have to kind of keep that as an anchor to remember that question to ask all the time.
Thank you. Mike?
I have a follow-up question to that, Judith. And I guess it's a sort of along the same lines as Jane's question. And I think you've kind of answered it, but I am curious how you have, and this is back to your structure, how you keep up the stamina, right? Because everybody's got more energy in September and October than they do, in the spring months. But how do you keep up the stamina for the monitoring and implementation? Like, how do you, one of the questions that I wrote down earlier was, how do you as a leader know how hard to push your staff when they're flagging and it's that 30-minute time and there's not a lot of energy in that room? I guess my question is sort of a combination. How do you keep up that stamina? How do you motivate them to have that stamina for that? And what are your people indicators? What are your indicators that the people that you're pushing them hard enough, but not too hard? Like, how do you gauge that when you're in the room, when you're talking with your team, when you're working on their performance appraisals, that kind of thing? I'm just curious about what your sense is of that.
I think sort of as big picture for having that year-long, I think that's why we had that year-long calendar, the Jean Lum Way, so people, and we paced it, right? So at the beginning of the year, we're spending a lot of time, we're asking teachers and supporting teachers in building community, core values, code of conduct, all of that piece. And what we mapped out for the end of the year is more of the celebrations, and even our play day is on there, right? So things like that, so that people can see the big picture. And so we were conscious of what was placed when in terms of the stamina piece. And that's from experience as an educator, like as just being in a school for many years, understanding. But as everybody does, and it's flexible. I also think fun, right? Like I try to, we have opening circles, or I often, that week before the winter holidays, that 4 months, like in December is off. Sometimes I create a little staff scavenger hunt. We have a staff member who left in the middle of the year. He left his staff photo. And so for a week, I just kind of hid it around the school, and they had to find it and take a photo of it. And some engaged, some didn't, but it was just a way to just kind of like take a quick photo, and we were able to share it. But getting back down to like who's doing moderating and all of that piece of doing the work is really seeing who's bringing those samples to the table and engaged in the conversation. And I'm going to reflect back on that grade 3-4 group that we had that just really struggled coalescing. And so having those having that relationship, highlighting it, to be able to go up to the teachers that maybe I could read in their body that they're not, like I could read that maybe they weren't actively engaged, or possibly weren't happy with what the conversation was, and being able to approach them, not in the meeting like, hey, you're not participating, what's going on, but let's finding a time in the hallway, or not in the hallway, but like, hey, I just wanted to follow up. My impression was this, is there anything going on? Is there anything I can help you with? And out of that came, well, I'm not really interested in this topic. It was chosen. I don't like this. I don't feel this is the group for me. So really reading that piece. And then again, going back to that approach with curiosity, right? Instead of going, this teacher is not participating, we need to, like, what is going on? Let's approach. But again, being firm as well, we have to do the work. This is work that needs to be done. Yeah.
So to quote Ted Lasso, be curious, not judgmental. I think that's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Judith, that was Emerson. Wasn't it Emerson he was quoting? Yes.
I don't know. Possibly. I think Ted Lasso.
Exactly.
Judith, you touched upon something that when you were speaking, I was reflective on, in terms of Jane talking about that monitoring and implementing and just keeping that going. And the relationship building, that soft skill of checking in, popping into classrooms, right? Talking to teachers and really trying to drop the thread of what the focus is through the PLC or through the SIP plan in those small moments, I think is the most powerful way to sort of build and can kind of make it consistent. One of the things that I know that I have found, I mean, I'm fairly new in being a principal. Well, I know 5 years, but still feels fresh. One of the things that I've learned that is really helpful is the groups. Sometimes we form groups based on either their choice or a particular topic, but you can see staff sitting in there sometimes where, as you mentioned, they're not necessarily engaged, or we're not hearing from them, they're not feeling comfortable, whatever the reasons are. And I think having some kind of an organic way to check in to say, hey, I listened to another staff member mention this, you might find this interesting, and being able to have them flexibly kind of move, right? Bounce around from group to group. But that's our job as a responsive leader, is to know our staff and to be listening, right? So sitting in those meetings, I know for me, my check-in is on my staff, not necessarily what they're saying, how they're saying it, how they're feeling, what their body language is. And I think that's the biggest piece that we can do, is the listening and the watching, right? As you mentioned, who's not speaking, why aren't they speaking, and trying to find a way to make sure that all of our voices come to the table in whichever way they're comfortable with. So I just was trying to strategize some of those structures, because those are the ones we don't see. Those are the structures we actually own as a leader, and are, you know, kind of underhandedly trying to not manipulate, but we are moving. It's like a puzzle. We're moving this piece over here for that piece so that we can come together as a cohesive group and all be heard, but also be respecting sort of those really important voices we're not hearing. So yeah, I just was going to mention that, if that made any sense at all.
Thanks, Caitlin. So, go ahead, Judith. Go ahead.
Nope, that's good.
I think, you know, being that great observer as a leader, you need to be that great observer and have the intuition to know where your staff are in terms of how they're receiving the work that you're doing on your teams in terms of school improvement. My question is for both of you principal leaders. How do you get motivation and encouragement? I mean, you have your partners, your VP partners. However, not every principal has a VP in the system. And even when you have your VP partner, as much as you work together collaboratively, there are times when both of you are a little bit stuck and have questions. And how do you get your motivation and your curiosity to continue to have these wonderful ideas and to be able to, move the school improvement needle along and not lose track of where you need to go in terms of being such an incredibly busy job, and making that time to be motivated and excited for your staff in terms of school improvement. So I'll start with you, Judith, and then move over to Caitlin.
Kindergarten to grade 8 schools are good for some time. A couple of things. It's hard, right? Especially if you're a single administrator. I've been in both situations. It's very hard. Or if you're in a situation where, truth be told, you might have a partner, an administrative partner, where you're building the relationship still, right? So it's different, or you're so relying on colleagues and finding that phone a friend. I can't emphasize enough of having a network of administrators or a network of whoever you need to have, that you could just close your door, pick up the phone and call or send a quick email, and am I reading this right? And just having that opportunity. I find these conversations very helpful as well, like being in a group like this as well, to being in a place where you are able to talk about the things that give you joy, because there's a lot. So find whatever it is that gives you joy in your profession. If you need the motivation, go to that place that's going to give you joy. I sometimes like to go to kindergarten world, because then they tell me how beautiful my shoes are, or I feel like I'm a celebrity, like, hi, Miss Bramers, or shouting across and just that little engagement with the students. Sometimes just that's all I need is a reboot to come back and deal with whatever is going on. Mm-hmm. So those are just a couple of things, but if the phone a friend, I can't emphasize that enough.
Thanks. Caitlin?
I think for me, aside from going where the kids are is always my go-to. Mm-hmm. I think checking in with my support staff is where I go, because they're the ones who are really hands-on with those kids who might be struggling, having a hard time. I feel like my teachers are in their room, but my support staff are kind of like my octopus arms. They're the ones reaching out and connecting with those kids that are the backbone of my SIP plan, or they're the reason why we're looking at assessment or what our goals are. So connecting and talking to them about the successes, or a good 30 minutes that happen for a student that might be having a hard time, is definitely, something that kind of keeps me going or motivates me, because essentially that's why we're here. Of course, as Judith mentioned, the quick email where you can send a joke or send a comment, or, I slipped in dog poo in the yard one recess and I got to share it with all the principals because I had to come back in. So I was living life like the kids were outside. Those moments, right? And sharing that with colleagues, and picking up a good book sometimes is a really good check-in, and a book about maybe what we're doing, right? And leadership, and just sort of keeps us kind of on the right path. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Judith, for presenting the structures and behaviors that are so necessary to keep the momentum for school improvement and to continue engaging not only your teaching staff, but your students. And what I would say is that students should be at the table with teachers in terms of school improvement and sharing best practices that are supportive for them in the classroom. So thank you so much for your work and your leadership at Gene Lum Public School. And Caitlin, thank you so much for offering to be part of the conversation here, and certainly sharing your best practices as a seasoned principal at Dover Court Public School. So thank you very much, everyone.